This is the hearing of the Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere, Transnational Crime, Civilian Security, Democracy, Human Rights, and Global Women's Issues. It's a broad, this committee has jurisdiction over a large number of issues. It is rare that every single one of them is being challenged in one place at one time. And I think the subject of today's hearing is a place where you can argue that transnational crime is present, civilian security is endangered, democracy is severely endangered, human rights is violated on a regular basis. And as far as global women's issues, some of the bravest activists on behalf of Venezuelan democracy have been women, including Lilian Tintori, among others, who have been treated brutally by the Maduro regime. The title of this hearing is The Collapse of the Rule of Law in Venezuela, What the United States and the International Community Can Do to Restore Democracy. And today we will have one panel and one witness, and it will feature the Honorable Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States. It is a unique privilege and honor to have him here today. As the ranking member commented in the hearing we had in this very room about an hour ago, it is not a commonplace occurrence in which an ambassador of an international, multinational organization such as the OAS is before us. Secretary Almagro was elected the Secretary General of the OAS on the 18th of March, the year 2015. He is a career diplomat. He was the Foreign Minister of Uruguay from 2010 to 2015, and he has extensive regional and international experience. In 2014, Foreign Policy magazine named him a leading global thinker, one of 10 decision makers in the world who have been granted this international distinction. But the area in which we have seen him, I believe, exhibit extraordinary leadership is as a staunch voice on efforts to restore democracy in Venezuela, and we're fortunate to have him here with us today. I'm going to abbreviate my opening statement because I do want to get into the Secretary General's statement, and I know that the ranking member who's been working on this issue even before me being here in the Senate has comments that he needs and wants and should make as well. I want to be fundamentally clear. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the conflict that's occurring in Venezuela. A lot of people talk to me about the opposition, and while indeed they are in opposition to Maduro's regime, they are in fact the majority party in the National Assembly. In essence, they are the majority, not the opposition. The problem is that the people with the guns and the army who are in charge of Venezuela have canceled democracy. For those, I imagine, attending this hearing today, you do so because you have an interest in it. For those who may watch it now or in the future, you need to understand that what's happened there is the following. And I apply what's happened there to what it would be like if it happened here. Imagine if the United States had an executive branch that basically took over the Supreme Court and put political cronies on it, canceled all funding and all function of the Congress, both House and Senate, went further and actually ordered the Capitol Police to attack the United States Congress if we tried to conduct our functions, cut off all operations, no salaries, no paper, no ink, nothing, no lights in terms of being able to meet. In essence, completely wiped out an elected National Assembly under the Constitution of that country. Imagine further if they announced we're not holding elections. We're not holding elections this year for governors and the legislative branch. We're not holding elections in the future for president. In fact, we're going to put together this fraudulent assembly, and we are going to impose a Cuban-style dictatorship under the guise of some sort of popular governance. That is the situation in Venezuela. Imagine even further, if, as an element of all this, elements within the government armed non-uniformed individuals and ordered them into the streets to attack protesters and beat them as part of militias. That is the situation in Venezuela. Or conduct trumped-up charges where they basically arrest political opponents, accuse them of ridiculous things, and jail them for extensive periods of time without charge and without recourse to the courts. That is the situation in Venezuela. And that is what brings us to this point. For what the people of Venezuela, the overwhelming majority of people in Venezuela, are asking for is simply a return to constitutional order. And I would say to you that it is not just the people that don't like the current leadership. It is people that actually agreed with Hugo Chavez. There are actually people that were supporters of Hugo Chavez and of the Constitution of Venezuela that have now aligned themselves with that cause, simply not because they ideologically agree with some members of the opposition, but because above all else, they want to see the rule of law restored. Chief among those voices is the current Attorney General of Venezuela, who on a steady pace over a period of time has begun to be critical of the Maduro regime. Today, she's now being charged with crimes for having done so. This is the horrifying situation. And if on the 30th of July, they move forward with this Constituent Assembly, which is a fraud, it will be, for the first time in my recollection, a nullification of the constitutional democratic order of a nation in this hemisphere in probably over 40 years. There have been coups d'etats, there have been strongmen that have emerged from time to time and disrupted the constitutional and democratic order, and there have most certainly been non-democratic leaders elected who then have not governed as Democrats. But we have never seen a structural imposition of a Cuban-style model in over 4 decades in the region. It would be tragic. It would be tragic anywhere. It is especially tragic that it is happening in Venezuela, a nation blessed with educated, entrepreneurial people, with a deep culture of democracy, and, by the way, one of the richest nations in the world. One of the richest nations in the world with natural resources and human resources that today its people cannot buy toilet paper, cannot buy toothpaste, and cannot access basic medications in their hospitals. All of it the direct result of the Maduro regime's decision. And finally, further complicating this matter is the existence within that government of narco-trafficking elements. Multiple leaders and figures in that regime who, in addition to operating governmental entities, are also involved in narco-trafficking activity to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. We have a catastrophe. And I conclude my remarks by saying that it is my hope that we can continue to work through organisms like the OAS in partnership with nations in the region such as Mexico and Canada, Brazil, Argentina, among others, who have stood forward on this. I'm encouraged to see statements out of the European Union, out of Spain, and multiple other nations that have pronounced themselves on this. I'm hopeful of that. I think that is the ideal way forward. I also know this, and I do not speak for the President, but I have certainly spoken to the President, and I will only reiterate what he has already said, and I've been saying this now for a number of days. I have 100% confidence that if democracy is destroyed once and for all in Venezuela on the 30th in terms of the Maduro regime, the President of the United States is prepared to act unilaterally in a significant and swift way. And that is not a threat. That is the reporting of the truth. But in any event, we are hopeful that there is another way forward, but time is running out. And I certainly, within that context, continue to be hopeful that a real resolution can come about in the OAS, but not through some fake negotiation designed to extend and buy time, but through a process that restores the democratic order, restores the National Assembly, holds free, fair, and internationally supervised elections, and frees political prisoners. There's nothing really to negotiate there other than who's in charge of making that happen. Anything else is a waste of time and nothing but a diversionary tactic on behalf of the Maduro regime to try to hold on to power. So we are very excited that the Secretary General is here. We look forward to hearing from him, and I recognize the ranking member, Senator Menendez. Thank you so much, and I'll be brief in my questions. They're rather to the point. From your understanding on the issue of revenue, to the extent that Venezuela continues to derive revenues from its oil industry, is it your understanding that money is being used simply to try to finance its debt at a discount, or in essence, they're selling that oil now at a steep discount? Is it not correct that the majority of the revenues they continue to generate are largely being used for corruption and or to finance the debt, and that very little of it is being used, and it is the reason why, for example, there's a humanitarian crisis in food, medicine, and other matters?
If we see all figures about health and nutrition in Venezuela, we see that practically the government is not investing at all in its people. All figures are awful and demonstrate a clear crisis in the humanitarian crisis in the country. The rates of child mortality, the rates of maternal mortality, the rates of bad nutrition of children. Diseases that were extinguished in Venezuela for decades, like malaria or diphtheria, have reappeared in the country. So we have definitely a government that is not investing at all in its people, but just to try to buy some wills, the will of through the clap bags given in order to achieve some political support, and of course to keep working in their political agenda in the continent and abroad. Nothing is improving. The government of Venezuela is practically the antithesis of any government. Any government will try to bring the crisis down to problems back down to difficulties, and to make the difficulties disappear. What we see in Venezuela is the contrary. From nothing they create problems. From the problems they create crisis, and further they escalate this crisis. The situation of the people shows that the money of the national resources that belong to that people is used to kill these people. The only action of government that we see is repression these days.
The question of humanitarian aid and assistance, which the Maduro regime continues to block because they continue to refuse to acknowledge they have a humanitarian crisis. There was, however, a negotiation sponsored by the Vatican, mediated talks in November of 2016, and there was discussion about establishing a channel for allowing humanitarian aid to reach Venezuela, possibly through Caritas Venezuela, which is an organization affiliated with the Catholic Church. To date, that has not happened. For those who were not involved or did not see that process of negotiation when it comes to humanitarian aid, to this day, are they allowing humanitarian aid into the country?
They are not allowing humanitarian aid into the country. And the only measure that somehow released some pressure, some social pressure, was when they opened the border with Colombia in order to allow that people that live in border states to be able to buy their basic needs on the other side. But no international help is able to get into the country. There is definitely a need for action about that. And when you do that, these political measures, the expense of the suffering of people, is the most awful way of doing politics, and is the most coward way of doing politics.
As you're aware, the Treasury Department of the United States has imposed financial sanctions on at least 17 Venezuelans for narcotics trafficking, including 9 current or former Venezuelan officials. For example, in February, the Treasury Department imposed drug trafficking sanctions against the vice president of the country. There are also very strong allegations made by defectors and others about the involvement of an individual by the name of Diosdado Cabello, who in my personal view, based on everything I have seen, he's not simply a political leader. He is, in my view, the Pablo Escobar of Venezuela today. He is a narco-trafficker. How complicated in this political dynamic is the existence of this narco-trafficking presence in Venezuela to the political overall crisis?
When you see the structure of government and you see the closest relatives of the presidential family are in jail in New York and are judged in New York for narco-traffic. Then you see that the vice president is the second in charge, has its resources for about $2 billion in the United States that have been sanctioned. When you see that number 3 is that Minister of Interior, Rubio, is also accused by the DEA by narco-traffic, then you have really a serious problem because it looks like the whole structure is taken by this by narco-traffic. So it's not how you move out of, how you push a dictatorship out of and bring back democracy. It's also now how you dismantle narco-traffic from the state, and that is a completely new challenge for our organization and for our community. That is is a very serious problem, like corruption is a very serious problem. Venezuela is the most corrupt country in the continent. That in itself shows that nobody is judged by corruption in the country. The only way to judge them is international, like the cases that involved corruption of PDVSA in Houston. So to attack these issues definitely is an imperative in all our country. To apply sanctions that can help solutions in this field are extremely necessary.
And my final question, at least for this round, because Senator Kaine has joined us as well, and I want to make sure multiple members have a chance to speak to you about this topic, is the following. It is our natural inclination as a nation and as a people and in the region, as is your job working in a multinational forum, to seek for there to be a negotiated process forward. In this perfect world, the Maduro regime would realize that this is unsustainable, and there would be some sort of conversation, a serious one, about holding elections for governor, holding elections for president, freeing political prisoners, and creating that space. However, and while I am not against that happening, I don't believe it is going to happen, and there's no indications that it's going to happen. And I would ask you to give us some insight into your views on negotiations, not in general, but as it pertains to Venezuela, and in particular, how the Maduro regime has used the ruse of dialogue and negotiation to buy time and divide the opposition and extend itself and perpetuate itself in power.
Yes, we have seen that, and we have denounced that. The way that the government uses dialogue is just to achieve two things, mainly: to release internal pressure and to release international pressure. That happened in the first week of November last year. There were not a single commitment to deal with the agenda that is necessary to resolve in Venezuela. In fact, if in Venezuela we don't call for free and general elections, if we don't free the political prisoners, if we don't reestablish the constitutional powers to the different branches of government, then no solution is possible. We can go around that agenda as much as we can, but there will not be a solution. The government so far has not been able to push for a solution like that. And it is very clear that the main task, and we saw it last year during the procedure of the recall referendum, we see it this year again, is how they remain in power, no matter what. Imagine that in any country in the continent would be demonstrations and 100 demonstrators were killed, anywhere. That government wouldn't be standing anymore. It's against the basic rules of democracy and human rights. The government, when they cannot use this tool of dialogue, they just go to repression. And then they try to move back to create some conditions of a dialogue without facing the real agenda of the country. I think these days when a real negotiation to put down a dictatorship happens, it is because the dictators come and say, look, how is the best way we get out? And that is how it starts. It doesn't start by bringing down the National Constituent Assembly. It doesn't start by trying to create side effects with the negotiations. You have to address the real agenda. So you put a date for the elections. Okay, then we can have a dialogue. You free the political prisoners. Okay, we can have a dialogue. You reestablish the power of the National Assembly. Okay, we can have a dialogue. If nothing like that happens, then the conditions definitely are not there. It is awful that the people of Venezuela has been condemned to be killed in the streets or to be submitted to the peace that the dictatorship provides, that is complete lack of rights.
Well, as I turn it to the ranking member, my observation is when the Pope says he's no longer interested in continuing to participate in a dialogue because he doesn't think the Maduro government is serious about it, when the Pope says that, it's a pretty strong indication that of how they've used these negotiations as a farce. The ranking.
Thank you.
The ranking member has entered into the record without objection a portion of your statement that he read. He also has entered the name of the 20 countries, and that, of course, will be entered into the record without objection. And I would just note, for the record, that those countries, those 20 countries, represent 1 billion people, and 90% of the population of the member states are represented in those 20 countries. With the senator from Virginia's indulgence, I just want to go ahead and put some things on the record. I don't want to forget. I'm going to ask the 3 reports that you presented to the Permanent Council, Secretary General of the OAS, on the situation in Venezuela be entered into the record as part of the statement. The first 2 reports lay out the deterioration of the humanitarian situation, as well as the complete alteration of the constitutional and democratic order. They also represent a series of recommendations that offer guidance for the international community. The 3rd report was released this week. It details the strategic and systematic violent repression targeting the unarmed civilian population in Venezuela. And in addition, I also asked that the Permanent Council Resolution 1078, recognizing the alteration of the constitutional order, be entered into the record. And finally, this is interesting, a report from the Office of the Attorney General of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, meaning the Attorney General of, theoretically, the Maduro regime itself, released a report on July 10th detailing the 92 deaths of demonstrators at the hands of Venezuelan security forces during the first 100 days. And I ask, and without objection, it will be entered into the record.
Thank you.
And just for a point of clarity on it, and I'm going off the Congressional Research Service here, first of all, let's describe the situation in Venezuela today. By estimates, Venezuela has international reserves of approximately $10 billion, according to this report, but its financing needs for 2017 are $17 billion. So they got a $7 billion hole at minimum. So they're taking extraordinary measures to repay creditors and unusual steps to raise cash. For example, it's turned to loans to China and to Russia. These loans are paid with oil deliveries. So they are, in essence, taking the oil that belongs to the people of Venezuela and selling it at a discount to China, or giving it to China and Russia at a discount in exchange for the cash. And even there, they have fallen behind on the arrangements. And then, of course, the well-reported sale of $2.8 billion in bonds issued by the state-run oil entity that was sold to Goldman Sachs for $865 million. So $2.8 billion of bonds in exchange for $865 million in cash. They're now also attempting to sell $5 billion in bonds issued in December at a steep discount. So one of the things that people don't realize is what the regime has done is they've taken oil, which belongs to people of Venezuela, and instead of selling it at market price, they're using it as payment in exchange for funds. And in the case of Russia, Russia's even taken a 49.5% stake in Citgo, which is an American subsidiary of the state-run entity. They own multiple pipelines and refineries in the United States of America. They are also engaged in the same sort of trade with Cuba, where they pay the Cubans in oil in exchange for doctors and other services such as intelligence and repressive advisory services, which Cuba is one of the few countries in the world that offers that as a service, is they teach you how to repress your people. And that is the question that I wanted to get to it in my second round here is we haven't spoken about it. Not enough attention's been paid to it. I am not sure that people are fully aware of the extent to which the Cuban government is deeply entrenched in the security apparatus of the Venezuelan government. And we've seen the reports that they are deeply entrenched and control everything from passports and travel documents to the personal security of Chavez and now Maduro and others. And certainly their hand is visible in all of these measures that are being taken, including the release of Leopoldo Lopez to his home. He's not released, he's in house arrest. We're very happy he's with his family and his wife. He shouldn't be detained at all. But it's a very typical Cuban government move where they release someone into house arrest, but they're still not free and able to operate. We haven't discussed the role of Cuba as providing assistance to the Venezuelan Maduro government. And I know they have other allies in the region, but Cuba is a critical ally. I guess I ask you in the way you deem appropriate, if you could describe the role that Cuba plays in sustaining the Maduro operations that we see today.
Yeah. First of all, we have to say that everybody is taking profit of this weak Venezuelan government, weak in the sense that they don't have the economic and financial possibilities that they had in the past. So if we see any agreement that they have done is they have given away a lot of these resources of the people. Every renegotiation has given away a lot of these resources of the people. And everybody is taking profit of that. Even the Goldman Sachs, as we have seen, they bought bonds for 30% of their values. That is like taking advantage of somebody that just needs money in order to stay alive. The same kind of agreements happen all the time. Cuba has been there longer and has taken more profit than any other country of the region. If we see the Cuban involvement is a serious one, and I think the Cuban management is like the worst advice that can exist in Venezuela these days. The Cubans passed the special period in the early 90s. They passed it without energy, cash, or possibility to import food. And so, more or less, they are saying to the Venezuelans, look at your conditions. You have energy, you have cash, you can import some food in order to implement the club bags. So this logic to sustain yourself through the repression is the Cuban logic. You just keep repressing, and you just stay in power because of that. If we see they are practically everywhere. There are at least 15,000 Cubans in Venezuela. The colonial occupation army of Spain had 22,000 people. So this is like an occupation army that exists of Cuba in Venezuela. And of course, they are not ready to leave this very profitable relation, and they are not ready to leave behind a regime that is sustaining this relationship. And so that is one of the biggest problems that we have.
I'm looking forward in your statement. I know I saw it somewhere you discussed, but here's some of the things again from the Congressional Research Center. A 2016 national survey released in March of this year found that 27% of the people in Venezuela eat only once a day. 93.3% of households lack enough income to purchase food. You've also, I believe I saw it in your statement or somewhere else about the amount of weight that Venezuelans have lost in the last year. Am I correct? That was in your, what was the number?
From 8 to 10 kilograms on average they lost
So that's
during last year.
19 pounds.
Yeah.
So the average Venezuelan is on 18 to 19 pounds in the last year because of hunger.
2 sizes smaller, at least.
Yeah, well, I saw a recent video of Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello. They have not lost any weight.
No,
What
they have improved a lot.
In fact, I haven't seen any weight loss among virtually anyone at senior levels of the government.
Yeah.
So
This is something that the people are suffering. People are suffering this shortage. They don't do queues. Their children usually are abroad in Europe or here in North America. They don't run the same in the same conditions that the rest of their people.
well, the last point you raised in your testimony had to do, I believe, with infant mortality, and you compared it to the infant mortality rate in another country, and I'm searching for it now, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, you state in your testimony, in 2016, 7 children died each day before reaching the age of 1. There are better survival rates for newborns in Syria. Does that, in your recollection, remain an accurate assessment? In Syria?
Yes.
The infant mortality rate, the survival rate of newborns is better in Syria than it is in Venezuela under the Maduro regime.
Yes.
And for the record, there is no U.S. embargo against Venezuela,
Yes.
nor any embargo from anyone.
No.
The only embargo on the people of Venezuela is self-imposed by the Maduro regime.
Yeah, but it's what I said in my presentation. The money of the resources that belong to the people, they just go to kill the people, torture the people, and nothing is provided to them. So any sanction on Venezuela will not worsen the situation of the people at all.
And just to echo the ranking member's comments, first let me add this. We didn't get a chance to get to it today, but I'd remind those watching here in the United States that we shouldn't forget the case of an American citizen from Utah named Joshua Holt. He's an innocent American who's been unjustly detained in Venezuelan jails now for over a year, caught up in the middle of all this crisis with absurd and ridiculous accusations. On the ranking member's point, I've said this in the past when people took it as a threat. It's not a threat. It's an honest observation about the state of affairs. I don't think you need to be a daily watcher of the news and politics to understand there is a vibrant debate in the United States about how much money this nation should be investing in foreign aid. And I've long been a supporter, as has the ranking member, for U.S. engagement in the world and in the region. But we have a debate about how much money the United States should be investing. And I can tell you it is a debate that becomes very difficult when the debate is about investing money in nations that are our partners under the guise of we want to support them because they're democracies, when these nations, in the only international forum in the region designed to defend democracy, are unwilling to do so for whatever their reasons may be. Maybe some of them have been involved in illicit activity that they don't want to be outed on and blackmailed by the Venezuelan regime. Perhaps others have an ideological affinity. Whatever it might be, it is difficult. Not a threat, I'm just being honest. It is difficult as a U.S. policymaker to turn to my colleagues from all across the country and argue that we should be funding millions of dollars of aid to countries who then turn around and support this. Not support this militarily, not support this economically, support it with a vote at the organism in the region designed to defend democracy. I do not understand how you can claim to be a democracy if you are not willing to support it at an international organism like the OAS. And that's just a fact, and that is going to be part of the debate in the months to come and weeks to come, because foreign aid is not charity. We do it because it defends our values as a nation, and we do it because it's in our national interest. So I say that. On the issue of these companies, the ranking member is absolutely right. Most Americans don't realize that if Venezuela defaults, Citgo is going to be owned by a Russian entity. And Citgo is a U.S. subsidiary that has pipelines, it has refinery operations in multiple states. I'm going to take a wild guess that that will not be very popular here in the United States of America or here in the United States Congress, given recent events. I don't think that's going to happen. And so I think if you're Vladimir Putin and his good friend who runs and owns that company and operates it for the benefit of their corrupt cronies over there, you just realize you own 49.5% of bad debt, because the only way you're ever going to get your debt repaid is a functional society and a country that operates and has an economy, not this disaster. As far as the Chinese are concerned, I'm sure they'd like to have more reach in the Western Hemisphere, but I can tell you what their number one concern is. They want to get paid back. They paid for this oil at a discount. They got a good deal. They expect to get the oil. And if they don't get the oil, it will be humiliating. Humiliating to the Chinese government that made this bad loan where they gave all this cash in exchange for oil, and they're not going to get it. And my message to the Chinese government is, these guys will never be able to pay you back. This is a dysfunctional narco state that is in a death spiral in terms of its ability to function. If you want to get paid back on your debt, the best thing that could happen for China is for a functional nation state that restores democracy and has an economy that works and can actually produce oil again. Because the oil doesn't magically produce itself. You have to have people willing to show up to work and people that know what they're doing. But this is what happens to an oil industry when all of your buddies and friends that know nothing about the industry get put in charge of it. And that's what's happened here. It became a piggy bank for everybody. And the third point is, on those in Wall Street that are thinking about it, the reputational damage of those who bail out Venezuela is going to be extraordinary. All this stuff is being documented as much as anywhere in the world. The list is extensive of people that have been jailed and oppressed. And I know that there's some good deals to be had in their minds in terms of the balance sheet. But I can tell you that whether they're a large multinational entity or a hedge fund looking to make a quick buck, the reputational damage of lending money to this regime will be extraordinary. It's not a threat, it's a promise that I intend to talk about you if you do it. And people will know it, and we'll see what that means in the short and long term. So this is a distressing situation. We are 13 or 12 days away from what I think will be, if it happens, a tragic and unacceptable outcome in our own hemisphere. And as I said at the outset, it'll be the first time in almost 4 decades that you have a formal structural abandonment of democracy in exchange for Cuban-style dictatorship, perhaps even worse in some ways, if that's even possible. And I just don't know how that's going to go over very well. And I hope we can get more of our colleagues interested in this topic, because my bigger fear on this side of the equation is, meaning as policymakers in the United States, is this is a very serious situation that could lead to all sorts of destabilizing effects in the region, including mass migration problems, beyond what we've already seen now, a deep endemic humanitarian crisis, and God forbid, violence, probably initiated by the regime. And it could happen, it could come upon us very quickly here if we're not prepared to address it. I believe, from everything I've seen and heard and talked about with them, that the U.S. administration not only wants to address it and be serious, but is looking for partners in the hemisphere to work with, hopefully through the OAS, or perhaps as a group of friends through the OAS. But July 30th will not come and go with a press release. Of that, I am 100% confident. Anything else? I thank you for being here today. I know how busy you are, how much time you spent on this. By the way, for those who do not know, and you have been the subject of extraordinary personal attacks by the Maduro regime and the other thugs that surround them. I know that doesn't necessarily matter to you directly, but your efforts have been noticed there, and I think anyone who they attack, I think that's a badge of honor, and so I just thank you for the efforts. They've been extraordinary, and we hear that from everyone, everywhere. And you say you were alone when you started. It is true. There's no way we'd be at 20 votes without your leadership on this topic, and I'm convinced that that number will grow in the weeks to come. So thank you so much. We're honored that you came here today.
Thank you.
And with that, I thank everyone for being here. The record will remain open for 48 hours. I intend to submit additional questions for the record. We'll get them to your office. We'll work out a process to make sure they're part of our record. And with that, our hearing's adjourned.